More than 20 million Americans say they have seen an unidentified flying object.
The U.S. government is investigating more than 600 potential UFO sightings.
Government scientists has alleged that the U.S. military is flying recovered UFOs at a secret base in the Nevada desert.
Congress are hot on the trail of UFO secrets reportedly held by the Pentagon, including allegations that alien materials are being stashed and studied by aerospace contractors.
Bob Lazar says there are at least 9 of the flying saucers being tested and that they were not built on Earth.
And it's real and it's there. And I had an extremely small part in it, but I'm convinced that what I saw is absolute proof of that. There is no way we could have created those systems. There's no way we could have made the discs, the power supplies, anything to go with them.
The year is 1987. A young and ambitious investigative journalist, George Knapp, was hosting a small public access show called On the Record, where he interviewed a man with extraordinary claims. A man by the name of John Lear would go on to tell an incredible story of astronomical proportions. A story that involved a government cover-up of all things extraterrestrial, the retrieval of 10 to 15 flying saucers, cryogenically frozen bodies of aliens, and a secret treaty between the US government and multiple alien civilizations. But most importantly, Lear would briefly mention a man he knew that claimed he was hired for a flying saucer reverse engineering project taking place somewhere in the Nevada desert. Later down the line, Knapp had become a 5 o'clock news anchor for KLAS in Las Vegas. Every evening, he would host a live interview with various candidates of many different backgrounds. The guest for that night had canceled the day of the interview, and Knapp desperately needed somebody to fill the spot. The first thing that came to his mind was Lear and the man he told him about in a prior interview. The man Lear was describing would turn out to be Bob Lazar, and in those few months prior, Bob Lazar claimed that he had worked at a classified base known as Area S4, a subsidiary of Area 51, where they would reverse engineer alien spacecraft in the Nevada desert. Little known to anyone else, Lazar's life would take a near-fatal turn. Lazar stated seeing signs of his imminent termination from his position, claiming to be followed after being relieved of duty. Lazar became extremely paranoid and constantly feared for his life. After all, the information he knew was highly sensitive. When he received a call from John Lear, May 15, 1989, he immediately said yes to the interview. It was either time for Bob to go public for protection or live in a life of fear until death. Still in fear, he would do his first interview under the alias of Dennis. This interview would catch the imaginations of the entire world.
There's really no way I can prove it without revealing my identity and getting myself into more trouble than I have already.
Exactly what's going on up there?
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs, that are out there of extraterrestrial origin, and they're basically being dismantled. Some are, well, in various stages of completion, built from other parts, and they're being test flown and basically just analyzed.
You say there's 9 saucers. How are those tests going?
As far as what?
As far as whether they're successful and that sort of thing.
Oh, well, some of them are 100% intact and operate perfectly. The other ones are being taken apart. I was involved mainly in propulsion and the power source, and basically, as far as I can remember, there are about half of them do operate, and the other half are just been torn down, basically to analyze the components to them.
Where did we get these saucers? How did they come into the hands of the government?
I haven't the slightest idea, and you have to understand the information is very compartmentalized.
Knapp and his team meet Lazar at Los Alamos Labs and conduct a further interview. Only this time, Lazar is ready to reveal his identity, as he fears his situation has grown more dangerous. He would go on to tell a story of astronomical proportion. Prior to his occupation at Area S4, Lazar had sent resumes to several national labs, accepting an interview from a company called EG&G. He was told that he would be applying for a position in advanced propulsion, but not exactly what he would be working on. The interview seemed to be very unusual. With a certain job in mind, they seemed to be very interested in his interests outside of work itself. Almost as if they were more interested in who he was as a person, rather than his credentials. Later down the line, Lazar is called in for a follow-up interview, where the employer tells him that he was applying for the position of a senior staff physicist. On work days, Lazar and other government employees would gather at McCarran Airport, catch a Janet flight to Area 51, then a small group would get on a bus and ride to Area S4. When arriving to the facility, Lazar was met with a unique building, with sloped hangar doors that were covered with texture paint, made to look like sand on the side of a mountain, virtually invisible from a distance, particularly from a bird's eye view. Lazar recounts being given up to 121 various briefings to read. He states that these briefings were on all sorts of outrageous topics, many being extremely hard to believe, things like alien autopsies, the history of human and alien interaction, and much more. One thing that did stand out was the topic of flying saucers. This immediately gained Lazar's interest. Whether any of it be true or not, The pure amount of info in front of him was probably some kind of test, either a test to see how much information he could retain, or perhaps a failsafe, so if he would expose any top secret information, they would know who to look for based on the specifics that were in his briefing. After being briefed on his duties, Lazar receives a top secret clearance status, referred to as Majestic. Upon being granted this clearance, Lazar would agree to have all aspects of his life monitored at all time. After all, the classified program had to ensure he wasn't working with foreign adversaries and to make sure he had a stable home life, as he would have to be healthy both physically and mentally. Lazar would then be escorted through the hangars, where he would finally see what he would be working on. There before him stood an actual flying saucer, with an American flag on its side. Lazar laughed to himself as he finally had an explanation to UFO sightings. These flying saucers must be secret advanced fighters made by the US government. Lazar would then be told to keep his eyes forward and his arms at his side, as they progressed past the remaining hangars, each containing a separate vehicle, some dismantled, others seemingly operable. Shortly after, Lazar would be introduced to his workspace, along with his lab partner, who seemed to have been there for quite some time prior. He then immediately showed Lazar their main focus. There, he had one of the reactors out of a dismantled craft, an antimatter reactor. He showed Lazar the reactor in operation for the first time and prompted him to try and touch the sphere on the top of the reactor. Lazar states that the reactor would push his hand away like some sort of force field, or two light poles of a magnet. The device was creating a gravitational field, something known to be impossible to man. From then on, Lazar knew that he was dealing with technology not of this earth. Together, they would be tasked to find out exactly how the system operated. Not long after, Lazar claims to have actually seen the reactor at work, as they would perform test flights with the operational craft every Wednesday. Everything that we have to date that flies uses a reactionary means of propulsion, whether it be a propeller, a jet engine, or rotors. It pushes high-speed exhaust or a large volume of air opposite your desired direction. This is described as an action-reaction force. For example, the exhaust from a jet engine is your action, and the propulsion is the reaction. Lazar claims that the craft he worked on used gravity itself as a means of propulsion. He claims that the craft makes a distortion in space and time in front of it, resulting in a wave of gravity that the craft essentially rides. Lazar's way of explaining this is to imagine putting a bowling ball on a mattress, then putting your foot down in front of it, having the ball move towards the area in the front that is being bent. So in terms, the craft would create a distortion in front of it and would follow that using gravity, almost riding gravity like a wave, just like the bowling ball on the mattress. Everything the craft did defied our laws of physics. Lazar states that he not only worked on the reactor, but he also got to see the entire craft itself, both inside and out. He says inside were 3 seats, all very small along with the panels associated with them, maybe about a foot off the ground, almost fitting for a child. The saucer had 3 levels. The bottom floor containing 3 large cylindrical devices placed on mounts, allowing them to completely swivel up to 180 degrees and in 360-degree rotation. Lazar refers to these as gravity emitters. Directly above those on the main floor would be a small rectangular object, which he referred to as the gravity amplifiers. In the center of these is a small reactor surrounded by 3 small seats and panels. The reactor would power the gravity amplifiers, putting the amplifier's output to the gravity emitters at the bottom, resulting in a gravity wave and the ability to bend gravity in any direction. The craft would stand on 2 of these emitters while stationary, allowing them to essentially stand and hover while using the third emitter at 180 degrees to create a distortion in front of it, allowing the craft to slide forward. This allows it to move at normal rates of speed and fly like your typical flying saucer. To go extremely fast and be able to make incredible movements, the craft uses all 3 emitters in the same direction, causing the craft to fly belly forward where the emitters are pointed. This created a greater distortion, leading to greater propulsion. Imagine it like if the saucer had wheels like a car, and if it stood up on its trunk, it would fly wheels forward. The final level at the top was split into 2 different areas that Lazar said he didn't know the purpose of. He assumed them to be some sort of navigational engine, with planes of sensor array that took information from its surroundings, pretty much acting as the craft's main computer. This is only an assumption, as this was not part of Lazar's job, and everything was very compartmentalized. Lazar claimed that the main source of power of these reactors was at the time the undiscovered element 115, and that the government was trying to produce the same effect of the reactor without using the element, as we could not produce a stable version of it. Element 115 would later be synthesized in 2003 and properly named Moscovium, only a year before Commander David Fravor would come across the famed Tic Tac. Further into his career, the program would find out that Lazar's wife was having an affair, eventually leading to a suspension due to his uncertain stability. This led Lazar to be extremely paranoid. He would then gather a group of his closest friends and confess his occupation. He would go on to show this group a flight test over Papoose Lake, in order to show them that he wasn't lying. After doing this for about 2 weeks and getting caught on the 3rd, Lazar would eventually be terminated, prompting him to eventually go public on May 15th, 1989. This story was of public interest, and if even a sliver of it was true, it was NAP's obligation to further investigate Lazar's credibility and get this story out to the public. The first question we ask ourselves is how does a normal civilian get chosen for a job like Lazar's? And why was Lazar chosen in particular? George Knapp spent about 8 months researching Lazar's background in order to validate Lazar's credibility. Lazar claims to have applied to Area S4 via national defense contractor EG&G. Prior to his occupation at Area S4, Lazar claimed to have worked as a physicist at Los Alamos National Lab, where he experimented with one of the world's largest particle beam accelerators. He also claims to have a degree from MIT in physics and electronics. When contacted, both Los Alamos Labs and MIT officials stated that they had no records of Lazar ever working or attending either location. Upon further investigation, Knapp had come across 2 pieces of evidence that would contradict what he was being told. The first of which being a 1982 phone book from the Los Alamos National Lab that lists Lazar among other scientists and technicians. Knapp also found a 1982 newspaper clipping from the Los Alamos newspaper featuring Lazar and his interest in jet cars, which also mentions his employment at Los Alamos National Lab as a physicist. When contacted again, Los Alamos officials still denied he ever worked there. So if Bob Lazar never worked at Los Alamos, why would there be evidence proving otherwise in 2 separate official documents from the same year? If he didn't have an education, how could he possibly even be considered for such a job? Some would discredit Lazar at this point. Others would argue that it's undeniably plausible that whoever was overseeing the program would do anything to discredit the whistleblower, in order to preserve its secrecy. Perhaps being dismissible made Lazar the perfect person for the job. In the end, Lazar's story piques the interest of many, some choosing to believe, and some choosing to be skeptical. But I'm not here to tell you what to believe. It's up to you to decide what to believe. I'm simply here to tell the compelling.